This video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. For weeks, if not months, the UK press has been obsessing over the budget. While this was always going to be the case with a brand new government, the heightened attention was only exacerbated by claims from Prime Minister Keir Starmer that the budget was going to be painful. Nor was it helped by a promise made before the election and since that any tax rises wouldn't affect working people, as it prompted heated discussions about exactly who does and doesn't, and who should and shouldn't qualify as a working person. Now, though we have all the answers, with Reeves making her budget statement in the House of Commons at 12:30 PM on Wednesday. So in this video, we're going to have a look into exactly what was in the budget, who these changes mainly affect, and whether Labour and Reeves can sustain the media backlash. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, it's worth starting with some context. On her first Monday morning as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves instructed Treasury staff to perform an audit on the government's spending, and Reeves subsequently claimed that they had uncovered a £22 billion black hole in public finances left by the previous Conservative administration, which Reeves said she would close. However, the issue was that Reeves had significantly tied her own hands. In the budget, Reeves committed to two fiscal rules: that the current budget must move into balance, so day-to-day costs are met by revenues, which essentially further committed Reeves to closing the black hole, and that debt must be falling as a percentage of GDP in the fifth year of the forecast, which essentially rules out excessive borrowing. Usually, this wouldn't be too much of a problem. The obvious solution would be to either cut public spending or raise taxes. However, Reeves additionally promised that Labour would not preside over a return to austerity, meaning no big cuts to public services, nor would they raise income tax, national insurance, VAT, or corporation tax. These taxes make up just under 2/3 of the government's revenue. It's understandable why then people began speculating about how she'd square the circle of closing the fiscal black hole without breaking any of her promises. After all, while there were other taxes that she could bump up, unless they were bumped up significantly, Reeves wouldn't increase revenues nearly enough to close the black hole. Instead, Reeves did something she promised in the months leading up to the election that she wouldn't do. You see, back in November last year, Reeves claimed that she wasn't going to fiddle the figures or make something to get different results. However, just a couple of weeks ago, she announced that she'd reinterpret her first fiscal rule, fiddling the figures and making it get different results. Essentially, the first fiscal rule very much relies on what you count as debt. One of the big changes she's made is creating a new so-called investment rule, which means that government assets are included in the UK's measure of debt. While this is a tad complicated, it ultimately means that Reeves has given herself leeway to borrow an extra £50 billion each year. So now we know the background to the budget, it's worth moving on and having a look at exactly what was announced. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we already knew that Reeves was going to use the budget to raise tax, and we know that she ruled out a rise on any that would affect working people. However, her definition of working people was fairly narrow, and there's already frustration in the media at a couple of the announcements. Reeves has increased employer national insurance contributions from 13.8% to 15%, while also lowering the threshold at which employers start paying the tax from £9,100 to £5,000 a year. This is expected to raise about £25 billion. Now, while this isn't technically a tax on working people, it's only the employers that will have to cover the increase, the idea that the employer won't pass this cost on to the employees is a tad fanciful. It's really hard for this to be perceived as anything other than a tax on working people, and will really start the ball rolling on the argument that Labour have broken their promise not to tax working people. Additionally, what really won't help is the fact that Reeves announced that she wouldn't increase income tax thresholds until 2028-29. If income tax thresholds don't rise, workers who are given higher salaries in order to keep up with inflation will be dragged into higher tax brackets. This is referred to as fiscal drag, and Reeves's budget has done nothing to prevent more workers being subjected to it for the next few years. While she tried to spin this as a win, as she'll update the income tax thresholds in coming years, it allows more workers to be dragged into higher income tax brackets until then. Now, while these policies will affect working people, there were some tax rises that were clearly not aimed at working people, no matter what the Telegraph opinion section tells you. The most significant of these is a relatively significant increase in capital gains tax, with the lower rate being increased by 8 points and the higher rate being increased by 4 points. Now, this at least goes some way for Labour to be able to explain that it's the wealthier in society that are shouldering the burden of the budget, and with those worse off being provided more support. And to be fair, the rest of the budget does go some way towards helping them develop this argument. Reeves announced a 50% increase in air passenger duty specifically on private planes, confirmed that VAT would be levied on private school fees in January, and confirmed that Labour would abolish the concept of non-domicile residents, also known as non-doms. This was all announced alongside an increase in the national living wage, the legal minimum wage for over 21s, to £12.21, the promise that a single adult rate will be phased in over time, a cut in draft duty in pubs, yet another fuel duty freeze, the state pension rising by 4.1%, as per the wages aspect of the triple lock, an extra £22.6 billion for the NHS, and an extra £5 billion for housing. Now, it's worth pointing out that these are just the headline announcements made by Reeves in the budget. All in all, though, for Reeves, this budget is one that avoids, as much as possible, tax rises on working people, while also providing the crucial investment needed to the British economy. As a result, inflation is predicted to remain below 3% for the next 5 years. The OBR's growth forecast has been revised upwards between now and 2026, with it being revised slightly down in later years, and government borrowing is expected to fall gradually until 2027-28, when the government is expected to run a £10.9 billion surplus. For Sunak, the Conservatives and the right-wing press, though, this is a budget that attacks working people, breaking Labour's manifesto promises, whilst also putting up taxes for people and businesses across the board. Or, as Sunak put it immediately after the budget,
national insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures.
Anyway, let us know what you think about the budget in the comments below. Now, lastly, one of the things that Rachel Reeves did introduce in the budget was something called the Office for Value for Money. But we don't need the Office for Value for Money to tell you how much of a good deal Henson shaving really is. If you're sick of the gimmicks other shaving brands use, the subscriptions, moisturising strips, lasers, whatever, then you'll need to check out Henson. Because, and here's the dirty secret about the razor industry, even the cheapest dollar store disposable razors will likely give you a reasonably smooth shave. The challenge is the impact they'll have on your skin. To protect your skin while shaving, you need to actually support the blade well, and Henson can provide that quality shave even with cheap blades, thanks to the Henson razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, which also produces parts for the ISS, and perfectly holds the blade at a 30-degree angle and extends it only 0.0013 inches, less than the width of a human hair. In classic TLDR style, that's important for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's way cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges aren't necessarily designed to provide a better shaving experience. They're about jacking up prices. Instead, Henson's razor takes standard blades that cost just 10 cents each, meaning that while the initial handle might be more expensive, in the long run you'll save a ton of cash. Secondly, it's far better for the environment to be using individual blades than joining the 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away every year in the US alone, with Henson's products containing no plastic at all, even in their packaging. Finally, this superb engineering and precise blade tech just provides an incredible shave. If you want to try it out, click the link in the description, then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Then once you've done that, add our discount code TLDR at checkout and you'll get all of those blades totally free.